And all of the countries of Eastern Europe, including Russia, were freed to take their own path. Russia was desperate to westernize. They wanted freedom of speech. They wanted freedom of religion. As you know, the Soviet Constitution was an atheist constitution. Today's Russian Constitution is a very strongly Christian constitution. So we had this unique opportunity. The Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet counterpart of NATO, just simply dissolved and went away. Doesn't exist, it's gone. And this was a historic opportunity for the United States to have said, okay, let's bring Russia into the European community. But instead, we decided that we would maintain NATO. And the only way that you could maintain NATO is to maintain this myth that there was an enemy, and Russia was chosen to be the enemy. And for that reason, we never really came to grips with the dramatic revolutionary changes that occurred within Russia when it no longer was part of the Soviet Union. We had a buffer of 1,000 miles between the German border and the Russian border. This was 1,000 miles. It was such a safety factor because the US, UK, France, all nuclear powers, Russia, a very great nuclear power. You needed that buffer in case something was awry. There was time to coordinate, time to diffuse situations. But instead, what happened, there was an enormous, powerful bureaucracy in NATO. People made their livelihoods on NATO. And so they converted Russia into the new boogeyman. And they began this inexorable march towards the east with the goal of reaching the Russian border. And they, over the decades following, they essentially achieved this. And they were to the point where the Ukraine, which is a large country itself, that was sort of the next step. In 2014, now moving up into recent times, in 2014, Ukraine had gotten offers of assistance from the EU and from Russia, various financial aid packages that they desperately needed. President Yanukovych looked at this. He was the duly elected president of Ukraine. He decided that the Russian package was the more realistic, the more immediate help for Ukraine, and he chose to take that one. As soon as he made that decision, the Central Intelligence Agency and British MI6 went to work. They instigated an uprising within Kiev. Kiev was called Kiev at the time, the capital of Ukraine. And with the help of CIA and MI6, it turned into a revolution, shooting, murdering various officials, police officers. And we managed, the US and the UK managed to overthrow the government and stage a violent revolutionary coup. At that point, there are many Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, about a quarter of the people. They tend to be concentrated on the east, near the Russian border. In two of these areas, what we call the Donbass, which is an area on the east of Ukraine, and it is adjacent to the Russian border. Within that pocket of Russian-speaking people, they and also the Crimeans, who are virtually all Russian, they said, look, we don't recognize this revolutionary government. We didn't elect it. We didn't have any part to play in selecting who they were. And now all of a sudden you have these revolutionary thugs who are telling us that we're taking orders. And so both the Donbass and the Crimea broke away. And very quickly, Crimea was reabsorbed into Russia. It had been Russian for 500 years. And then the Donbass declared its independence, the Donetsk Republic and the Luhansk Republic, both together make up the Donbass. What happened next is NATO, under the urging of the United States, began pouring weapons into the Ukraine. They began sending troops, putting boots on the ground, NATO boots on the ground, to train the Ukrainian revolutionary coup and their military training them with Western weapons to kill Russians. And so then all the time this is going on, Russia is desperately trying to work with NATO, with the United States, to defuse the situation, because they could see that war is becoming closer and closer. Now, getting very recent, go back to December of 2021, just last year, just a few months ago, Russia made one last desperate attempt to achieve peace. They went so far as to lay out a detailed peace proposal that they submitted to NATO, and they said, look, this is our position. Let's talk, let's negotiate this. Let's establish a peace for Eastern Europe so that, you know, Russia, Europe can get over this and work together. NATO was very dismissive. And when I say NATO, it's important to remember that essentially NATO is an agency of the United States. They don't really function with tremendous independence, and to some extent, you could almost look at the EU as kind of a vassal state of the United States. It has been this way. You know, Germany functions in some ways, I hate to say it, as a vassal state, because I love Germany. I love the people there. But the U.S. calls the shots, and the U.S. said, forget about this peace proposal. Now, as this is going on, as Russia is desperately trying to achieve peace, meanwhile, President Zelensky has been installed by the U.S., by the CIA, by NATO, and he orders a huge army to assemble to attack the Donbass. 250,000 Ukrainian troops, their best, their most experienced, their most professional, they surround the Donbass, 250,000. And they're armed with the latest Western weapons, with Stinger missiles, with all sorts of anti-air and anti-tank missiles. And at this point, Russia, under President Putin, they know they're not prepared for a war. They're not prepared to attack. But they realize that at any moment, the Ukrainians are about to attack the Donbass. They've already fired about 2,000 artillery missions into the Donbass. This is from Ukraine into the Donbass. And now nowhere is this mentioned in the US media. President Putin, he has delayed as long as he can. He realizes the attack is imminent. He attacks with 190,000 men. Now this is important. There is a rule of thumb that throughout the military for hundreds of years, everybody knows when you are attacking, you would like to have a ratio of 3 attackers for every 1 defender. That's one of the most common military rules of thumb, 3 to 1. Putin is in the posture where he is forced to attack with less than 1 to 1. So this is not some huge pre-planned plot on the part of Russia. This is essentially a last-minute recognition. We've got to do something. This is our last chance to break up this assault on the Donbass. At that point, Russia crosses the border. It sends troops into Kiev, which ties them down, and at the same time, it begins to fight in the Donbass. The last thing in the world that Russia wanted to do was to fight this war. They did not want it, but NATO was hell-bent on it. They knew without question that if they continued pushing forward, if they attacked in the Donbass, Russia would be forced to fight. They knew Russia was going to fight, and they compelled them to fight. So this really is not, it's not a war of Russia's choice.